The candlelight is low and a little too warm, the kind of glow that softens the edges of everything it touches. You sit at a heavy wooden table, the air faint with beeswax and something faintly metallic. Maybe the silverware, maybe the crown just sitting there like it's waiting to be worn. Outside, the night hums. Inside, the palace is hushed, as though even the walls have learned to hold their breath. You can hear the quiet rustle of gowns in distant corridors, the muted clink of a servant setting down a tray, the shuffle of slippered feet across polished stone. You are in a royal court that would look grand anywhere in the world, except, perhaps, the people who actually live here. To them, this is just home. Gold-threaded tapestries depicting battles no one here fought. Portraits of ancestors whose eyes all seem to share that same unsettling sameness. You look at one long enough and realize, yes, the chin is identical to the one in the next portrait over. And the next. And the next. It's like the same face is being remixed through the centuries, only the hairstyles change. This is a world of Europe's most infamous inbred royals, where bloodlines are guarded more fiercely than national borders, and family reunions look suspiciously like wedding receptions. Your host would argue that it's all in the name of preserving power, property, and purity, though purity, in this case, has an unfortunate tendency to mean fragile health, and faces that could be cousins with themselves. You probably won't make it through this day, mostly because the air in here feels like it's half candle smoke, half powdered wig dust, and your lungs are not trained for this environment. Before we go further, a gentle reminder. If you enjoy sinking into these soft, winding stories, you might like and subscribe to join me on more of them. And while you're here, comment your location and the local time. I'm always curious to know from which corners of the world you're drifting off. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You walk down a hall that smells faintly of lavender and something less pleasant, like damp stone that's been holding centuries of secrets. Servants bow as you pass, their eyes not meeting yours, because it's safer that way. In the corner of the grand salon, two princesses are playing chess. Both have the same pale, translucent skin, the same sharp nose, and the same distracted, faraway gaze, as though half their mind is here, and the other half is on an arranged marriage they already know too much about. The truth is, royal bloodlines were treated like precious wine. Keep it pure, don't mix with strangers, and above all, make sure it stays in the family. Unfortunately, unlike wine, this method doesn't improve with age. It's the 16th and 17th centuries when the Habsburgs, the Bourbons, and other dynasties turned this into something of an art form, if you can call repeatedly marrying your first cousin art. Historians still debate whether Charles II of Spain, the poster child for Habsburg inbreeding, could even walk without assistance for most of his life. What is certain is that his jaw was so pronounced it could have had its own political title. The family portraits don't lie. They look like the artists were working from the same sketch, over and over. The weird tidbit of the night? At one point, some Habsburg weddings were so intimate, the couple shared not just grandparents, but uncles. Imagine trying to explain that family tree to a modern genealogist. They'd need a strong drink and several sheets of paper. And so, as you drift through these corridors, you start to feel the weight of a lineage that's been folded on itself for centuries. It's not just history, it's the air you're breathing now. Morning comes. Though here in the palace, it's less about sunlight and more about someone drawing back curtains with a ceremonial flourish. A thin shaft of light slices across the room, catching on the gilt edges of a mirror. You notice the glass is slightly warped, an antique imperfection, but it still reflects your face, pale from the drafty night, and behind you, the towering canopied bed you barely slept in. The day begins not with breakfast, but with an audience. You follow the hush of slippered footsteps into the throne room, where the royal matriarch sits. She is a vision in brocade and pearls, her expression unreadable. You've seen that expression before, painted on portraits, etched into coins. It's the same, generation after generation. And yes, the chin again. Always the chin. As you stand there, you realize something. Nobody here calls this inbreeding. To them, it's strategic marital alliance. A polite phrase that glosses over the fact that the family's idea of expanding the gene pool is adding a second cousin into mix. One major historical fact becomes impossible to ignore. By the late 17th century, the Habsburg dynasty had so thoroughly entangled itself through intermarriage that Charles II of Spain had more instances of the same person in his family tree than most people have distant relatives. His coefficient of inbreeding, yes, that's an actual scientific term, was higher than if his parents had been siblings. It's the genetic equivalent of running a photocopy through the copier over and over until the image starts to blur. Meanwhile, a court musician strikes up a tune in the corner, a delicate melody on a lute. It's almost enough to distract you from the peculiar breakfast ritual now unfolding. Silver trays reveal not the hearty bread and cheese you were hoping for, but a delicate soup, apparently better for digestion in the morning. You sip it. It tastes faintly of almonds and history. The obscure tidbit today? Some royal brides were married before they even knew how to write their own names. Literacy wasn't the point. Being of good blood was... In one recorded case, a princess of Austria was married at 13 and didn't meet her husband until the wedding day. He was her uncle. Yes, her actual uncle. Try not to think too hard about the honeymoon. Historians still debate whether these arrangements were ever questioned by anyone inside the palace walls, or whether dissent was just too dangerous to speak aloud. What is clear is that the tradition persisted for centuries, through political crises, plagues, and even wars. It wasn't love. It wasn't even romance. It was strategy, and the family treated it like holy scripture. As you leave the hall, you pass by that same corridor you saw last night. Remember the chess-playing princesses? They're still there, though now one is staring out the window, and the other is idly spinning a gold ring around her finger. Their lives have already been mapped out like territories on a war table. You wonder if they even know it yet. The day stretches on, filled with subtle rituals, careful glances, and the quiet hum of history repeating itself. You are both an observer and a guest in a place where time feels like it folds back on itself, just like the family tree. Afternoon in the palace doesn't feel like afternoon anywhere else. There's no scent of baking bread from a street corner, no cheerful clatter of market stalls. Instead, the day is marked by the echo of boots across marble and the faint, almost imperceptible scent of incense drifting from the chapel. Somewhere in the inner courtyard, a fountain trickles, its steady rhythm the only sound that dares interrupt the layered silence of stone walls. You wander toward the gallery, a long, sunlit room lined with portraits so massive they seem more architectural than decorative. Each one is a study in finery. Lace collars so intricate they look like snowflakes, stiff bodices that must have felt like wearing an embroidered plank. And, of course, the faces. That same high forehead, that same jawline, looking down on you from oil-painted heights. It's almost like they're saying, yes, we all look alike. That's the point. One fact stands out, quietly insistent. The Spanish branch of the Habsburgs kept such a tight grip on their marriages that over 200 years, they effectively turned their dynasty into a closed genetic loop. By the time Charles II was born in 1661, he had only 16 great-great-grandparents instead of the usual 32. The rest? Repeats, like reruns on a channel that refuses to play anything new. In the corner of the gallery, an elderly attendant dusts a bust of a queen whose eyes seem almost too close together. You suspect the sculptor was being kind. The attendant notices you looking and murmurs a detail he probably shouldn't share. That queen was wed to her double first cousin. Two family lines converging into a neat, unhealthy knot. The obscure tidbit today? Royal physicians sometimes prescribe more of the same as a cure for weak heirs. If a child was sickly, the answer wasn't new blood. It was reinforcing the pure blood with yet another cousin match. The theory was that foreign blood carried unreliable humors, which is one way to put it. Historians still debate whether this insistence on purity was purely ignorance of genetics, or whether politics so thoroughly outweighed health that nobody cared to ask questions. After all, when your entire worldview is built on the sanctity of lineage, admitting a flaw in the system would feel like treason. By late afternoon, you're invited to the Queen's chambers for a private audience. This sounds intimidating until you realize it mostly involves her watching you drink tea in silence. She asks polite questions. Your name, your family's position, your opinion on the weather in Spain in September, though you suspect every answer is being weighed for hidden meaning. A lady-in-waiting hovers nearby. embroidering a scene of a stag hunt that looks suspiciously like it might contain a self-portrait of the embroiderer. As you leave, you catch sight of a younger princess practicing her courtly bow. Her form is perfect. Her eyes, however, drift toward a tapestry of a wedding feast. Another royal couple who probably shared more DNA than advisable. The scene is joyful on the surface, but the longer you look, the more the painted smiles seem brittle. The palace windows glow amber in the fading light. The corridors hum with low voices, and somewhere you can hear the faint strum of a lute. The day isn't over yet, but you're beginning to understand that here, days aren't meant to be lived so much as endured. Evening in the palace arrives softly, almost apologetically, as though the day is bowing out rather than ending. Servants move like shadows, lighting candelabras with careful hands. The air is warmer now, heavy with the scent of wax, and roasted meats drifting in from the banquet hall. You take your place at the long dining table, a gleaming stretch of wood, where golden plates and silver goblets wait in perfect symmetry. The head of the table is occupied by the king, a man whose presence is less commanding than ceremonial, as though he'd been propped there by tradition rather than choice. His face, predictably, carries the unmistakable family signature, that broad Habsburg jaw, like a stone terrace where conversation comes to rest before it can fully leave the mouth. Tonight's major historical fact emerges in the chatter between courses. The Habsburg jaw wasn't just an artistic exaggeration. Modern genetic studies suggest it was a real hereditary trait amplified by centuries of close-kin marriages. The condition, mandibular prognathism, made speech and chewing difficult for some monarchs, though protocol ensured no one dared mention aloud at the table. As roasted pheasant is served, a courtier seated beside you leans in with peculiar story. Years ago, at a particularly prestigious wedding, the bride and groom had been so closely related that the priest joked, quietly and only after much wine, that he just blessed the same family twice. The remark nearly cost him his position, but the guests laughed. The marriage went ahead as planned. Your obscure tidbit of the night. Some royal wedding feast featured entire sugar sculptures of family trees, intricate, edible monuments to lineage, though in this case, they must have looked less like branching oaks and more like a tightly wound spiral. Historians still debate whether the people at these tables were fully aware of the medical consequences of their alliances, or whether they genuinely believed that blood purity was worth the price. Records suggest at least a few courtiers whisper concerns, but whispers don't change traditions when those traditions sit on thrones. The banquet stretches on, courses melting into one another like slow-moving tides. Between bites, you catch snippets of conversation. The weather in Vienna, a shipment of pearls delayed by storms, rumors of a cousin in Naples about to be wed to yet another cousin in Madrid. By the time dessert appears, a shimmering pudding that trembles slightly under candlelight, the room feels warmer, heavier. The laughter is subdued, the kind bore a habit rather than joy. You glance again at the king, who is nodding at something said 3 seats away, his jaw set in that unmistakable profile that has been painted, sculpted, and minted onto coins for centuries. When you leave the hall, the corridors are quieter than you've ever heard them. The flickering light from the sconces paints the walls in amber and shadow. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimes, and you realize that here, time is not measured in minutes, but in marriages.